The pancakes were still on the stove when she knocked. Not knocked, pounded. The kind of sound that doesn't ask whether you're ready, that doesn't pause and wait, that announces its own authority in the percussion of it. 8:12 on a Saturday morning, and my kids were still in their pajamas at the kitchen table. The good kind of Saturday that doesn't have anywhere to be yet. And I heard the door, and my first thought, the half-asleep, still in the morning thought, was that something was wrong. That kind of urgency usually means something is wrong. I turned the burner down and went to see. My name is David Calloway. I've lived at 14 Pembroke Circle for 6 years with my wife Beth and our daughter Cora, who was 6 at the time, and our son James, who was 4, and who approached every morning with the specific, uncontainable energy of a child who has slept perfectly and cannot understand why the rest of the world hasn't caught up yet. Before I moved in, I spent 4 years working directly for the City Compliance Office, processing the exact category of disputes that happen at the intersection of municipal ordinance and private association governance. Before that, I spent 3 years in law school specifically because I had watched, in an earlier job doing administrative work for a housing authority, the way official-looking documents got used against people who didn't have the vocabulary to question them, and I had decided I wanted the vocabulary. I'm a municipal compliance attorney now. It is not a job that makes for exciting dinner party conversation, but it means, in practical terms, that I know precisely where city code ends and HOA authority begins, and what the legal consequences are when someone tries to treat that line as negotiable. I tell you this not to establish credentials, but because it is the fact that changes everything about what happened, and Karen did not know it. The chalk drawings were on the driveway. Cora had done them the afternoon before, while I was mowing the back lawn, and Beth was on the porch, watching a house with smoke coming from the chimney, even though we didn't have a chimney. A sun with 12 rays, and what Cora explained was our dog Murphy, but which looked, if I'm being honest, more like a cloud that had grown legs and was reconsidering the decision. James had contributed 4 or 5 concentric circles in blue chalk, in the corner of the driveway that he described as a tornado, which seemed right. The plastic slide was on the lawn, the old one, the discontinued model with the slight warp in the middle that made it faster than it looked. The one we'd had since Cora was 2, and that both kids still used with more enthusiasm than its age warranted. The scooters were by the garage door. The basketball hoop was at the end of the driveway, the 6-foot adjustable kind with the sand-filled base, positioned so the kids had room to use it without getting near the street. This was Saturday morning at number 14. This was our life, correctly arranged. I opened the door. Karen was on my porch in a navy blazer and pearl necklace at 8:12 in the morning on a weekend, clipboard in hand, with the particular smile of a person who believes they are about to ruin your day and has organized their face around the pleasure of it. I had seen Karen at 2 HOA meetings in 6 years and exchanged perhaps 8 sentences with her total.
I knew her by reputation. You cannot live in a community for 6 years without understanding who the HOA president is and what they regard as important, but we had never had a direct encounter. We had given her no reason for one. 6 years of dues paid early, lawn maintained on a schedule that 2 different neighbors had mentioned approvingly in passing, no noise complaints, no fence disputes, nothing.
We were the kind of household that an HOA president's eye slides past because there is nothing to act on. Until that morning she had decided there was too many toys, she announced. Not quietly. Not to me specifically, the volume was deliberate, calibrated for the neighbors who were out that morning, the ones watering lawns and walking dogs and doing the early Saturday things that put people in their driveways. She wanted witnesses. She had chosen this time because the witnesses were available. This is not a daycare. She came down off the porch before I responded and began circling the property with her phone out. The chalk drawings, the slide, the scooters, the basketball hoop. She photographed each one with the methodical attention of someone processing a crime scene, pausing to zoom in, crouching for angles, moving around the perimeter. Then she came back to the door and took a violation notice from her clipboard and taped it directly to the front door while I was standing there. $480, violation. Excessive child clutter. She said it out loud as she taped it. Not to me. To the morning, to the neighbors within earshot, to the record she was creating in public. Then she smiled at me one more time and walked back to the street. I stood in my doorway and watched her go, and I felt several things in sequence. The first was a hot immediate thing that I recognized and set aside because it wasn't useful. The second was something colder and more organized, the professional response. The part of my brain that reads a situation the way it reads a code violation, identifying the components, understanding the applicable framework, noting where the action being taken exceeds the authority behind it. The third thing I felt was certainty, the specific certainty of someone who knows, before they have verified it, that they already know the answer. I also thought about the cameras. The porch camera that had been running since Karen walked up the front path. The Ring doorbell across the street belonging to my neighbor Gary, whose camera angle I knew covered my driveway because he had shown me footage of a deer at 2 in the morning the previous November, laughing about it. And the camera mounted under my garage eave that I had installed after a car break in 3 houses down the previous spring, positioned to cover the full driveway approach, 3 angles. Audio on at least 2 of them. Everything Karen had just done, documented from the moment she arrived. I went back inside. I turned the burner back on. I finished the pancakes. I put the plates on the table and sat down with my kids, and James explained a tornado theory to me at considerable length, and Cora asked if she could do more chalk after breakfast. I said yes, absolutely, go ahead. Beth looked at me from across the table with the look she used when she was asking a question she already knew the answer to. I said I'd make some calls Monday. She passed the syrup, and we ate breakfast, and the morning continued the way it was supposed to. I want to go back a little further than Monday, because the 6 years before that Saturday morning are the reason the Saturday morning resolved the way it did, and because Pembroke Circle was something before Karen made it into something else. We had moved there when Cora was 6 weeks old. Beth had done the research. She was methodical about it in a way I wasn't. Driving the streets at different times of day, sitting in the car to feel the traffic patterns and the quality of the quiet, walking the block twice before she told me she thought it was right. What she was looking for was something specific and somewhat hard to articulate, which was the quality of a place where children could be outside without it being a production. Not a performance of family life, not a curated neighborhood where the lawns were perfect because everyone was afraid of the letter, just a street where kids could be in the driveway and people looked out for each other in the unremarkable way that good neighbors do. She had found the right place. In the early years, before the kids were mobile, and then before they were verbal, and then before they were the specific kind of loud and physical that 4- and 6-year-olds are, Pembroke Circle had been exactly what Beth had identified it as. Tom across the street helped me with the gutters one October, without being asked, just showed up on a Saturday with a ladder because he had seen me struggling with the angle. Diane, 2 doors down, organized a block dinner every August that was genuinely good, not in the polished, catered way, but in the way that happens when people actually want to be there. When James was born and Beth ended up in the hospital for 4 days, with complications, a placental situation that terrified us for about 36 hours before the doctors got ahead of it, 3 separate neighbors left food on the porch. Not 1, 3. I had come home from the hospital that first night to find a casserole dish and a note from Gary, a container of soup from Diane, and a paper bag from Tom with a loaf of bread and a 6-pack of beer and a note that said, "I figure you need both right now." I stood in my kitchen at 11 at night holding that note, and I thought about what it meant to live somewhere that noticed. Karen had been president for 3 years when that Saturday happened. The reputation had preceded the direct experience. I knew from conversations over fences and at Diane's August dinner and in the parking lot of the school pickup line that Karen ran the HOA with the specific energy of a person for whom the position was not a civic obligation, but an identity. She had strong opinions about fence paint. She had strong opinions about driveway materials and holiday decoration timing and the precise positioning of trash bins on collection day. She expressed these opinions through formal written notices with the HOA letterhead and the fine structure attached, and she expressed them consistently enough and persistently enough that most people found compliance easier than contest. The complaints I heard about her were never about specific unfairness. No one could point to a rule she had invented rather than enforced. The complaints were about tone, about the way the authority was carried, about the smile. I had filed her away as a person to maintain cordial distance from, and had succeeded at that for 3 years. 6 years total. No violations, no interactions beyond the 2 board meetings I'd attended out of a sense of civic obligation I didn't fully follow through on. Then she taped a notice to my front door because my children had chalk on the driveway. Monday morning, I went to my office and I pulled up Municipal Ordinance Section 14(3). I had read it in a professional context 14 months earlier, a client dispute involving a different HOA in a neighboring jurisdiction, and I had remembered it the way you remember things that are directly applicable to your own life, which is more clearly than you remember things that aren't. Temporary recreational equipment on private residential property, daylight hours, explicitly permitted. Not subject to HOA enforcement action where city code provisions supersede association bylaws, which in this municipality they did explicitly under the supremacy clause in the city's residential governance framework that had been added 6 years earlier, specifically to address the category of HOA overreach into protected residential activities. Chalk on driveways. Section 14(7). Non-permanent surface expression, legally protected. Not enforceable as nuisance under HOA provisions. Portable recreational equipment, not obstructing public right-of-way, explicitly excluded from HOA nuisance enforcement categories. I called the City Compliance Office, not to complain not yet, but to verify. I described the situation and asked whether a formal written clarification was available regarding HOA enforcement authority in these specific categories. The woman I spoke to, a senior compliance coordinator named Renata, who I knew slightly from my years at the office, said she would send a written response within 2 weeks. She sent it in 10 days. The letter was 3 paragraphs. It stated, in the flat administrative language of a city office issuing a clarification rather than a ruling, that the HOA had no enforceable authority to impose fines on residents for the items described under the conditions documented, that any such fines were inconsistent with municipal ordinance as it superseded association bylaws in these categories, and that the HOA had been previously advised of these provisions in a general notification sent to all residential associations in the municipality 18 months earlier, previously advised. Karen had known, or she had received the notification and chosen not to distribute it to the board and chosen not to apply it to her enforcement practices, which was a different kind of knowing, but knowing nonetheless. I put the letter in the blue folder, along with the printed ordinance sections highlighted and tabbed. I put the violation notice in the folder. I backed up all 3 camera angles from the Saturday morning to my office server and made a copy to an external drive. Then I waited, because I had a professional instinct based on the smile and the public announcement on the driveway and the 6 years of reputation that preceded her, that Karen was not finished. She wasn't. The Monday letter arrived with $1,200 and a final notice stamp in bold red across the top. The original $480 had tripled, citing repeat non-compliance. There had been no prior violation to repeat, and a $75 administrative inspection fee for what was, at its core, a fee for photographing sidewalk chalk. The language described my children's toys as unsightly juvenile obstructions. I read that phrase 3 times. Then I added the letter to the blue folder. Then I found the forum post. Karen had put the photographs in the HOA's private community group. Zoomed in, cropped tight, with captions. Some residents treat our neighborhood like a playground. The comment section had done what comment sections do. A few people laughed. A few people stayed quiet. A few people asked questions that nobody answered satisfactorily. The family at 14 has been here 6 years. One comment said, "No issues I've ever seen. What changed?" She came back Wednesday with a measuring tape, standing in my driveway measuring the distance between the sidewalk and the basketball hoop with the focused attention of someone who believes the measurement will reveal something legally significant. I watched from inside for about 2 minutes. Then I got the blue folder and went out. I said her name. She looked up. I told her before she added another fine. She might want to check city code. She laughed. The full laugh. Surprised and dismissive in equal measure. The laugh of someone who finds the suggestion genuinely beneath serious consideration. This is a private community. We make the rules. I opened the folder. I read her section 14. 3. I read her section 14. 7. I read her the specific language about HOA supremacy limitations under the city's residential governance framework. I held up the page so she could see the highlighting. I did this without drama, without raising my voice, with the same tone I used in professional settings when I was reading statutory language to someone who needed to understand it, which is to say flatly and clearly and without editorializing. Then I showed her the city compliance letter. I watched her read it. I watched her find the phrase previously advised and stay on it for a moment. Her face did a thing that faces do when the performance layer and the reality layer briefly come apart just for a second, just long enough to see. Then the performance came back. I told her I had filed a formal complaint. The measuring tape was at her side, the clipboard was at her side. The neighbors I could see in peripheral vision had gone very still in the specific way that people go still when they are no longer pretending not to listen. She straightened her blazer. She said, HOA bylaws still apply regardless of city code. I handed her the certified letter. Selective enforcement, harassment, and abuse of authority. 17 properties on Pembroke Circle and the adjacent streets with bicycles on lawns, lawn ornaments, holiday inflatables, a trampoline, 2 other basketball hoops, a garden statuary situation that I had opinions about, but that was entirely within anyone's rights. None of them with violation notices. None of them photographed and posted to the forum. The selective enforcement documented property by property, address by date, the video footage from Saturday morning, all 3 angles synchronized and time-stamped. The city's written clarification, a demand for full reimbursement of all improper fines and all associated legal costs. And the 3 other families, this was the part Karen hadn't anticipated, because this had not been the first time. The pattern went back 14 months. 4 families, 11 improper fines across categories that were either explicitly protected by city code or selectively enforced in a way that couldn't survive documentation. 2 of those families had paid without contest because they hadn't known they had grounds to push back, because when something arrives on official letterhead with a fine structure and a red stamp, the default assumption is that it represents a real legal obligation.
And most people don't have a specific professional reason to question that assumption. I had called those families after the first violation notice arrived because Diane had mentioned Karen's track record at the August dinner, and I had started quietly paying attention. All 3 had agreed to add their names to the complaint within 48 hours of my calling them, not reluctantly.
With the specific relief of people who had been waiting for someone to tell them they were right to be bothered, Karen held the certified letter. She looked at it for a while. The clipboard was still at her side. She left without saying anything else. The emergency HOA board meeting was called within 2 weeks. I was told afterward by 2 board members who contacted me separately that the meeting was quiet in the specific way that meetings are quiet when the documentation has already done the work and there is nothing left to argue about. The board had the city letter. They had the selective enforcement analysis. They had the forum post and the 3 camera angles from my driveway. They had a formal complaint with 4 family names and a case number and my name on the letterhead. The OA's attorney was a careful man named Walter, who I did not think had known the full scope of what Karen had been doing and who communicated, in our subsequent correspondence, the specific mortification of a professional who has discovered that his client has been operating well outside the bounds of what he had been advising. Walter was thorough and prompt and issued the formal written apology to all 4 families within 3 weeks of the board meeting. Every fine rescinded. Every administrative fee refunded. A written acknowledgement that the enforcement actions had been inconsistent with both municipal ordinance and the HOA's own properly read bylaws. Karen was voted out as HOA president at the emergency meeting, not narrowly. The community forum post was taken down and replaced with a pinned post the board titled "Know Your Rights Before You Pay," which laid out the city code provisions on recreational equipment, chalk, portable toys, and the specific categories where municipal ordinance superseded HOA enforcement authority. I was told it had been written by a board member named Susan, who had herself paid a $200 fine 18 months earlier for a wind chime that she now understood had been an improper citation, and who had written the post with the energy of someone who had been waiting a long time to put something useful in that space. 4 more families contacted me in the month after the resolution. 3 had paid fines they were now questioning. One woman named Patricia had removed a trellis from her backyard 2 years earlier, after receiving a violation notice and a threat of escalating fines, had spent a weekend taking it down and another weekend disposing of it, and wanted to know if she had any recourse. I spent 40 minutes on the phone with her going through the ordinance. She had grounds, she filed. The recovery process took 2 months and was not. She told me afterward worth it financially, but was worth it in some other way she didn't have an exact word for. I understood that completely. The 4th family decided the fine amount wasn't worth their time, which I respected, and I told them so. Not everyone has the bandwidth for the fight, even when the fight is winnable, and that's not a failing. That's just the reality of what it costs to push back, even when you're right, even when the documentation is clean and the law is on your side. Some people pay the $200 and move on, and the cost of that shouldn't be invisible just because the amount is small. Gary came over on the Sunday after the resolution. He stood in my driveway for a moment, looking at the fresh round of chalk drawings James had graduated from tornadoes to what he was now calling a full weather system, which required most of the available driveway surface and several colors, and then he said without preamble that he'd wanted to say something for a while and hadn't known how to do it. I told him the footage had said it for him. He looked at the weather system again. He said Cora's dog was looking more like a dog. I said she'd been practicing. He nodded and went back across the street. That was the conversation, and it was enough. On a Saturday morning in November, 6 weeks after the resolution, I was on the porch with coffee earlier than I needed to be, just watching the cul-de-sac do its morning thing. Cora and James were still inside, still in pajamas, the Saturday rhythm reasserting itself. The basketball hoop was at the end of the driveway where it belonged. The scooters were by the garage. The chalk was in the bucket by the door, waiting for the kids to come out and continue the weather system, which had been expanded and revised and partially reined away and redrawn several times over the past weeks, and which now covered the entire driveway in a complex meteorological diagram that James explained differently every time someone asked him about it. The morning was quiet. Tom was doing something in his yard across the way. Diane's car was in the driveway. The street had the particular quality it had had in the early years, the quality Beth had identified from the car before we ever moved in, which was the quality of a place where people were simply living, without anyone managing them. Beth came out with the coffee pot and stood next to me for a moment. She refilled my cup without asking. We watched the street together. Inside, we could hear James starting to move around, the specific sound of a 4-year-old who has been awake for a few minutes and is building toward emergence. The door banged open, and he came out onto the porch in his pajamas, with his hair pointing in 3 directions, and looked at the driveway and said, with the urgency of someone resuming something important, "I need the blue chalk." Beth went inside to find it. I stayed on the porch. The morning did what November mornings do. Got a little colder, got a little brighter, settled into itself. The weather system on the driveway waited. Some mornings, that's the whole story. The chalk is in the bucket, and the kids come out, and the coffee is hot, and the street is quiet in the way it's supposed to be quiet, and nobody is managing anyone. That's enough. That's actually everything.